and machine gun fire and mortars and distant artillery. It's likely to be like this for the rest of the day.
You ready? Come on.
It's 3 a.m. on a warm summer's night in the war-ravaged Donbas region. We're in a Ukrainian army vehicle approaching a hotly contested frontline trench position. To use headlights this close to the Russian lines, only a few hundred meters away, would be suicidal. So the driver is having to rely on night vision equipment.
This is it.
From here, we have to make the rest of our way on foot. A sporadic artillery fire punctures the silence.
Дрон перестал.
So it's about 3:30 in the morning, and we're in a trench system in the very front line, somewhere in Donbas. Our journey here on foot involved no talking and no lights, obviously. And as we got closer to this position, we could hear a drone somewhere overhead close by, a Russian drone. And one just has to be very, very careful. I don't know what that was, but it wasn't very big.
The male team has been allowed unprecedented access to the front line as the soldiers wait in dugouts for first light and the inevitable full-scale resumption of hostilities. For all the advances in military technology, what you're about to see will demonstrate the similarities between conditions on the Western Front more than a century ago and those in this 21st century war.
Most of the men, the Ukrainian soldiers who are manning this trench line, are asleep. It's all very strange to be here and to be so close to the Russian line. While we were able to avoid the drone under cover of darkness, leaving the trench line after dawn is often more risky, as we would find out later. One of the deeper dugouts. It looks very much how one imagines a dugout on the Western Front in the Great War to be. There are 4 beds here made of trees from the forest, and I've just been served a cup of English breakfast tea by Oleg, who is our guide. We've had to be very quiet up until now because a Russian drone is overhead, and the bangs, the small bangs you may have heard in the background are soldiers from this position trying to shoot the drone down. But we're now as undercover as we can possibly be in this situation. It's not quite breakfast time. It's just before 4 o'clock in the morning. But breakfast is served. Cheers. Oleg, there are a lot of, we have the noise of the drone up there, but we have a lot of mosquitoes. Is this a problem? Inside.
First light has arrived. Here, the trench parapets are at head height, with firing steps dug into the walls. This provides maximum cover while still affording a view of the battlefield. And with daylight comes an increase in hostilities. The walkways are narrow. In full body armour, it is a tight squeeze for Oleg and I to pass one another.
There's a lot of mortar, and something just went over the top of the trench.
This network of trenches, underground galleries and dugouts was built last autumn when the area was recaptured from the Russians during the Kharkiv offensive. The open space in front of us is no man's land, or the grey zone as the soldiers call it. Once it would have been a farmer's field. Now, at the height of summer, it is wildly overgrown, providing cover for infantry patrols or assaults on the opposing trench line.
There's a firefight happening between the Ukrainians and this line of trenches and the Russians, or the Orcs as they call them, which are about 400 meters away. You can hear artillery landing as well. Daylight is broken properly at about 15 minutes ago, and the war has really started in earnest here in this section of the trench. You can hear small arms rifles and machine gun fire, mortars and distant artillery. It's likely to be like this for the rest of the day.
Come on.
Soldiers here tell us that the most dangerous time is when you leave the trench in daylight, under observation by enemy gunners. This we are about to find out for ourselves. Should be easier in the daylight, but the battle is raging around us, and at least one Russian drone is overhead.
Come through to the edge of the wood now. We've paused. So clear quite how close we are to our transport. There's quite a lot of artillery going backwards and forwards. You can hear them shushing away.
You ready?
Get in.
Now we discover that in the darkness we had driven too far, across a field that is in full view of the Russians. We have to drive back across the field in daylight, and we do so at breakneck speed, with mortars landing far too close for comfort.
We had to walk all this way.
Were we supposed to?
Well, suppose, yeah.
Paris, the car covered through it.
We make it intact as dawn heralds a new day along the old-fashioned front line of this bitterly contested modern war.
They were like zombies and we killed them all, 100%. In a trench, the one with more grenades usually wins. The trench assault is, I think, the most difficult task in this war. This is a real science.
The conflict in Ukraine is very much a 21st century war. with the deployment of hypersonic missiles, thermobaric bombs, suicide drones, and the threat of the use of tactical nuclear weapons.
But one tool remains as important as it did on the Western Front of 1916. That is the spade.
The first 48 hours of the full Russian invasion of Ukraine in February last year suggested there would be a swift victory for modern mobile warfare and overwhelming odds. But the Russian thrust at Kyiv was halted and ultimately defeated by a combination of intense artillery bombardments and modern Western anti-tank weaponry, such as the Javelin. The Russians withdrew from Kyiv at the end of March, and the conflict entered a new and more static phase, one that would be very familiar to those who lived through or have studied the events of the early 20th century: trench warfare. This had already been going on here in Donbas, hundreds of miles to the east of Kyiv, since 2014, when Russian-backed separatists declared their own breakaway republics. Today, 17 months after the full Russian invasion, the Mail Team has been given unprecedented access to trenches and other dug-in positions along the Donbas front line, from the Bakhmut sector to Liman. But why is the trench still so important in this conflict? Why does the lopata, as the spade or shovel is called in Russian and Ukrainian, remain the soldier's best friend? The principle of trench warfare is relatively simple. A soldier wants to put as much missile-proof material between himself and the enemy guns, while still being able to participate in the battle. The simplest, quickest, and cheapest way to do this is to dig a hole in the ground and position yourself inside it. If you adapt that approach to the needs of a platoon, who can also stay in close contact with each other, you require something a little larger than a hole, a trench. A battalion or a division of soldiers requires a trench network. Trenches allow troops to hold ground or provide cover when assaulting an enemy, whose firepower is likely to inflict serious damage or defeat them if they remain in the open. Such warfare has been the subject of scientific study and improvement since the 16th century, when trenches and earthworks were built around besieged cities to provide the attackers with cover from defensive fire as they got closer to the walls. It reached its apogee during the Great War of 1914-18, when industrialized firepower in the form of the machine gun and howitzer had far outstripped any advances in the mobility or personal protection of the common soldier. After initial and very costly battles of maneuver, opposing armies were forced to dig in and face each other across no man's land, behind barbed wire defences. The advent of the tank, the development of military aviation, and the success of blitzkrieg tactics in the Second World War seemed to spell the end of trench warfare. But this was not to be. The Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s ended in a stalemate of trench warfare, of bloody over-the-top infantry assaults. Today, in Ukraine, we see something similar. The trench network of the Western Front stretched almost 500 miles from Switzerland to the sea. In Ukraine, the trench networks wind even further across this vast landscape. It is a sign of deadlock. From the start, the Ukrainians have been at a disadvantage in numbers of soldiers and quantities of heavy weapons. Their air force is also severely outmatched, but the Russians do not have total air superiority and have lost large numbers of attack helicopters to Ukrainian air defense. This spring, anticipating the Ukrainian summer counteroffensive, the Russians constructed vast new trench networks, protected by minefields, in the areas of the front line they considered vulnerable. On the other side of no man's land, the Ukrainians have also been bolstering their defences. One of the diggers is Maxim, a 36-year-old soldier from Lviv, who has been in the Donbas front line for 5 years. He explains that these trenches were dug just behind the front line, because there had been intelligence of an imminent Russian attempt to break through in this sector. He says digging in dry sand is preferable to hard ground or mud, and it is always better when you can dig away from direct fire. If the ground is too hard, or mechanical diggers are unavailable, soldiers will often first use explosives to soften it up, but they will always finish the job with shovels.
Or something like another situation, we must have second way. That's why we build this trench. Now there is good for us, good ground, because it's a sand. It's not difficult to use scaffold. It's better for us. Trench is very important for our war. We have one way for save our lives and our weapon and take our position is only trench. We built it as big as possible because if you have big trench, you have big life.
Do you enjoy digging trenches when it's 30 degrees?
Oh, it's hard work. All this weapon explodes underground. You know, as if you will be lower, it's much safety for you because all parts what fly over from explodes fly in different size. But if you will be lower, it's fly under head, but not in your head. It's no matter what is the caliber or kind of weapon. It's the same principle. You know. If you love your country, you don't must die for this country. You must make that enemy guys die for his country, something like that. You must every time be alive.
This is Oleg, who is a sergeant in the Ukrainian Armed Forces. For the last 15 months, he's been fighting in the Donbas frontline. Much of that time, he's either been living in trenches or he has been assaulting Russian trenches. I was interested when Oleg was driving the other day when he said, well, yeah, the Russians are pretty good at making trenches. They have the book, they have their manuals, the doctrine of how to make a trench.
In general, the construction of trenches is a science. A lot depends on how you build it. A correct trench should go in a zigzag pattern, observing the required distance. Even small trenches, as deep as a hand, the Russians dig them correctly. They have already learned how to do it. At the beginning of the war, they were digging just to dig, but now they're building them very properly. Proper passageways, proper foxholes.
But the daily shelling by each side of the other's trench lines is mentally wearing for those underneath it.
Yes, not everyone can stand it. When you live in a trench for a long time, you know that approximately when and what kind of shelling will occur and how to react to this or that sound. For example, a tank is the most dangerous because the sound of a shot is not heard. A shell arrives immediately. But you get used to everything.
Of course, to win this war, one side must leave the safety of their own defence works and attack and defeat the enemies. The soldiers tell us that the two sides have displayed very different offensive tactics.
The trench assault is, I think, the most difficult task in this war. The positive result of the assault depends, in my opinion, on 2 points. The first is preparation for an assault. Before entering a trench or any position, a lot of artillery, mortars, and in some cases aviation is used. That is, the more you iron the opponent in the trench, the more you demotivate him. I have had cases when artillery shelling lasted 40, 50 minutes, an hour, and you simply cannot raise your head. Many people are shell-shocked. The planning of enemy trenches is studied, where exactly the dugout is located, possible escape routes, etc. A lot depends on how the artillery works on the enemy's logistical routes to prevent them from bringing the ammunition. Sabotage groups work at command and observation points to cut off communication between enemy units. This is a real science. Each assault operation is very carefully elaborated. The battle in the trench is very tough. In a trench, the one with more grenades usually wins. But a properly constructed trench, a zigzag, reduces the explosive effect of a grenade. Movement along the trench is often complicated by its small width. Fighters often interfere with each other. Care should always be taken to avoid friendly fire. There's no panic in such cases, but the adrenaline can sometimes lead to mistakes.
He says the Russians he has defended his trenches against use very different tactics.
In Bakhmut, we often cross paths with Wagner. Their tactics are completely different from ours. As I have already said, our artillery and mortars work first on the enemy trench, and then special forces and infantry go in. But the Russians sent in their infantry first, like a wave of meat. I saw the weapons with which these first groups marched. They had weapons from the 1950s, covered with rust. It was very strange to watch the half shell-shocked people who came forward towards us and shot at us without hiding. It was disturbing to watch. There should be some instincts, some thoughts about one's own safety. But there were none. They were like zombies, and we killed them all 100%. After that, the second group followed, the third group, the fourth group. Only after we have destroyed these waves did they use artillery on us.
One weapon that the soldiers of the Somme did not have to contend with, that makes life in the 21st century trench more dangerous, is the drone. These machines, often armed with grenades or mortar bombs, are able to loiter over an enemy's trench, from where their operator can identify individual soldiers as targets, or call in pinpoint artillery fire. Sergeant Lehija says that this drone threat is psychologically very stressful.
The main thing is not to panic. I've developed an automatic habit when I hear something, see something, or very often only feel that something is wrong. Then I look for possible means of hiding. Of course, there is fear. Many things that are in the sky you simply cannot see. The first time you hear the sound of a drone, it is very scary. You get to know or sense that they are around, and they are almost always there.
Our presence for Russian.
Shooting down Russian drones and other low-flying enemy aircraft is one of the jobs of this Frontline air defense unit, although they sometimes engage ground targets with their autocannon. We come across them and their ZSU-23 armoured vehicle while they were concealed under walnut and cherry trees at the edge of a meadow that is covered with poppies and other wildflowers. A Ukrainian howitzer a few hundred meters away is firing shells over our heads into Bakhmut. The anti-aircraft gunners, all wartime volunteers from Kharkiv and ranging in age from 19 to late 40s, are in the process of finishing a large communal dugout. They know all too well the perils of Russian artillery fire. Ivan, 45, a welder in civilian life, suffered ligament damage when he tripped in a trench while under artillery fire. His comrade, 37-year-old Alexander, a meat processing worker, suffered shrapnel wounds to his legs in another bombardment. They talk to us about everyday life in a trench or dugout.
До всього привикаєш. Питаємося собі все одно, що робити удобства.
How do you keep clean?
Сухий душ. Продається в пачках, водою заливається, як салфетки.
Of course, there are no toilets in a trench.
Це не проблема. Туалет не проблема.
In general, it's simply a hole in the ground, which is, after that, we cover it with soil and that's it. In most cases.
Унітазу нема, звісно.
Of course, we do not have the toilet seat.
Ivan misses his wife's borscht, which she cooks for him every day at home. Here, they take turns to cook meals for each other.
По можливості,
Yeah, the one
по ситуації.
who can handle this particular duty at the moment. Yeah,
Звісно, да.
yeah, sure. We try to cook.
The stove is important, but the spade more so.
Коли ти знаходишся, коли потім почне прилітати, і тобі є рядом лопата, це є можливість врятувати своє життя. Тобто, чим нижче ти зариєшся в землю, тим є більше варіантності спастися.
In the autumn of 1918, the Allies broke through the Hindenburg Line at the Second Battle of Cambrai, and the war was over within weeks. Now the Ukrainians are probing the Russian lines for a decisive breakthrough. They are finding that it is easier to defend a trench line than to attack it. Which is why the hymn to the spade continues to be sung by the ordinary soldier.
Today, in this war, this shovel is your first friend, and the ability to use it saves your life. It gives you confidence that you have some chance. It is the best survival weapon for today. Before, I could not imagine that I would love this thing so much.
In Ukraine, death often comes from a clear blue sky. A
Russian shell has struck a Ukrainian army position on the Donbas front line.
Давай, берег! Серенький, маленький мой, давай! Быстренько, ребята!
In the shelter of this cellar, 2 soldiers of Thunder Company attempt to resuscitate a mortally wounded comrade.
Вдох! Воздух выходит.
Such casualties have occurred countless times since the Russian invasion of February 2022. Now they're being inflicted in sub-zero temperatures. We are in the second winter of the full-scale war. Battlefield conditions are taxing for both sides, but pressure is growing on Ukraine, not least since summer's failed counteroffensive, and more recently, the suspension of American and EU funding. The situation in at least 3 sectors of this vast front line is difficult, the Army's Supreme Commander has admitted. For the last 2 weeks, male photographer Jamie Wiseman and I have been given unprecedented access to Ukrainian troops on these frozen front lines. Among our hosts were Thunder Company. Artillery continues to take the greatest toll of soldiers on both sides. But as the temperatures remain far below zero, frostbite and pneumonia cases have also begun to appear on the casualty lists. The future for Ukraine is uncertain. Victory, whatever that looks like now, less assured. But this is where a badly mauled but still determined Ukrainian army has dug into the snow and ice in preparation for a new Kremlin onslaught. Dawn over Dnipro after a night of hypersonic missile attacks. It's so cold that the Dnieper River, a mile wide at certain points, has frozen over. The temperature is falling again, towards a predicted minus 21 degrees centigrade, as the last leg of our journey to the Eastern Front begins. It takes us through a vast flat snowscape, broken only by the outline of trees, occasional car wrecks, and halts for military checkpoints. In the distance, one of the Donbas coalfields' slag heaps looks like an iceberg in a polar sea. We reach the little Donetsk town of Kurokov. At Christmas, following a long and devastating siege, the Russians captured Marienka, only 20 minutes' drive from here. Many observers believe Kurokov will be the next target in the Russian line of advance. As we arrive, it's under Russian rocket artillery fire. Most residents have left. The only civilian to be seen in the main street is a drunk, shouting at passing military traffic. We drive on to meet a drone unit of the border guards we had visited last spring when they were involved in the defense of Marienka. Bivouacking in an abandoned cottage, they grumble about the cold and challenging military situation. This is not good drone weather. The skies are clear, but when the temperature falls below minus 10 degrees, the drone's batteries lose power. There have also been instances of rotors freezing in mid-flight, causing the machines to crash. Daniel, who worked in a travel agency before the Russian invasion, is now a qualified FPV drone pilot, flying his machines via video goggles. It is now 15 degrees, but he can't wear gloves because the controls require fingertip sensitivity. His hands are purple with cold. The drone he is trying to launch refuses to lift off. The battery is sleepy.
This war has made me hate the winter. I dream of the summer. After victory, I don't ever want to feel this cold again.
Such sentiments are shared by Nazar, a dentist by training, now a senior sergeant in a scout battalion. For the past year, his unit has been in continuous action near Bakhmut. Nazar is carrying a new American AR-15 assault rifle, equipped with a thermal scope. He paid for it from his own pocket.
Bad things for us, we must buy everything for ourselves.
Really?
Yes, because for example, this one is not so cheapest, but it's around 3,000 euro. When you speak about something money, it's you can say, oh, maybe it's not so cheap. But when you speak about your life, I'm not sure if you're ready to sell your life for 3,000. So.
His unit's hardest fighting of the full-scale war has taken place during this winter and the last.
Really, in the nighttime, when it's frost coming, the Russians start going forward. For Russian country, the winter time is perfect time. And for me, it was look like some deja vu last year and this year again. It's hard to go in somewhere. It's very easy for our enemy found us, because it's in winter time it's so hard to go somewhere where you don't see somebody.
I ask him about rest and rotation.
Actually, it's a little bit painful question for us, because especially our group don't have rotation.
So you need more men in the front line?
Yep. More guns, more equipment, and first of all, it's more men.
We reach an ice-bound hamlet beyond the city of Sloviansk. Here, another abandoned cottage is being used as the medical command post for a battalion of the 56th Brigade. The doctor in charge is a young reserve lieutenant called Victor. He talks candidly about the pressure he is under and the new challenges that the winter war has imposed.
It's very tough now on the battlefield. Sometimes we don't sleep for several days. 80% of the casualties we are treating are caused by shrapnel rather than bullets. But due to the steep fall in temperature, we are now getting cases of pneumonia and frostbite. Because of the sub-zero temperatures, the safe time for applying a tourniquet is also significantly reduced to no more than an hour rather than 2.
Battlefield evacuations are carried out using an elderly M113 armoured personnel carrier. Marked with red crosses, it is nevertheless concealed under trees, the drone threat again, in a field across the lane. Manufactured for the US Army during the presidency of Jimmy Carter, the vehicle is much older than the doctor.
Once, in an extreme situation, we were able to get 11 wounded soldiers, including 2 stretcher cases, into the back of this thing, along with 2 medics.
I wonder at the circumstance in which so many were wounded at one time, but then we meet Thunder Company and understand. Thunder Company headquarters is in the countryside close to the frontline city of Kupiansk. Even before the war, life must have been hard for whoever lived here. There is no running water. Back in Kyiv, the restaurants and bars are full of young people who have neither volunteered nor been drafted for the war. Here, our hosts are grizzled, stout-bellied, and with medical conditions that should have seen them signed off as unfit. But they are determined. This existential conflict is largely being fought by Ukraine's Generation X. The average age of a Ukrainian combat soldier is 43. They've also been equipped with some rather elderly weapons.
This is a Carl Gustaf M45 submachine gun, which was produced in Sweden in 1945 and retired in the Swedish Army, from the Swedish Army in 1965. This particular weapon was given to a Ukrainian army unit to fight the Russians in 2022. It's still on the front line.
The company's deputy commander, a walrus-moustached veteran with the call sign Kruger, gives us a demonstration of what he calls with some disgust, this museum piece. Igor, the company supplies officer,
had a heart valve fitted after he suffered blast injuries in 2014. He has been wounded almost every year since then. He finds solace in cooking for his comrades and us. Splendid stews and his speciality, a donut made from cottage cheese, raisins and jam, called pundiki.
This is stew made by the amazing Igor, who is a very talented amateur chef.
Such comradeship has been forged in adversity. The original company was almost totally destroyed in the meat grinder of Bakhmut. The commander says that of his 120 men who went in, only 26 came out alive or without life-changing injuries. They filmed this footage during a Russian artillery attack. One of their soldiers was caught out in the open.
Серенький, маленький мой, давай, держись. Быстренько, ребята. Я не могу поднять, тут уже все. Давай. Хотя бы тащи. Давай, давай.
The severely wounded soldier is taken down into the cellar, but he has stopped breathing. His comrades begin to perform CPR on him.
Так, Серега, попробуем реанимировать. Мне надо, чтобы кто-то искусственно это делал, пока я сердце ему пробью. Серег, в рот, блядь. Да понял. Давай, сука. Я скажу вдох, делаешь вдох. 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 Ленка, я вижу, воздух выходит. Вдох. Надо запустить мотор. Начнем себе с мотора. Есть. Его аптека где? Набрались. Давай, давай. Есть вода? Нету.
Thunder Company held their position there for 7 months. The unit that replaced them lost it inside 3 weeks. What remained of Thunder Company was taken out of the line, then folded into the newly formed 41st Brigade. Now they are on the Kupiansk front line, facing a new Russian offensive. We are billeted in an outbuilding, and by 3 a.m. it's simply too cold to sleep. Out in the darkness, artillery fire is marking a slow drumbeat, like the tolling of a village church clock back home. The next morning, the snow gives way to heavy rain. Meltwater pours off our hovel's roof.
For the last few days it's been very, very cold, minus 20 and falling. And in fact last night here it was too cold to sleep. But the rain came this morning. As you can see, there is a serious thaw going on. And of course that presents new challenges for the soldiers who are having to fight the war here.
On the Kupiansk front, ice becomes slush and mud, creating another kind of misery for those fighting the war here. Yet within hours, the rain stops, the temperature plummets, and the slush turns back to ice. This is frostbite and pneumonia weather. But whatever the conditions, the military activity does not stop. Hundreds of newly cut pine trunks have been piled here by army engineers. The timber will be used to strengthen Ukrainian trenches and dugouts. In other words, defensive rather than offensive positions. Kupiansk city is an unhappy place of damaged buildings and foreboding of what is still to come. It has already changed hands twice in this war. Something like normal life carries on, but the streets are largely empty and the city remains under threat from artillery strikes and a new Russian ground offensive. The front line is very close. All the road and rail bridges over the Oskil River have been destroyed. This bridge used to carry the railway to Luhansk.
There is one pedestrian crossing left.
This is the partially destroyed bridge over the Oskil River in the centre of Kupiansk. 5 miles, approximately 5 miles beyond this bridge is the front line.
Nowhere is safe here. A sign at this petrol station, within range of Russian artillery and drones, warns that no more than 4 cars should stop on the forecourt at any one time. It is a prime target. Behind those sandbags is a very brave female cashier. In other circumstances, this would be the perfect winter's day for a walk in the woods. The temperature is a little below zero, the sky a faultless blue, the snow crisp underfoot. But these details are incidental to the crash and boom of artillery fire, both incoming and outgoing. Two Ukrainian soldiers in white camouflage overalls have stepped from among the trees to meet us. We must move quickly and keep under cover, they say, because the conditions today are also ideal for drone warfare, and the Russian front line is well within range. Indeed, the Russian border is only 25 miles away. This is the Kupiansk forest in the Kharkiv Oblast of northeastern Ukraine. From their camouflage positions inside the forests on the eastern bank of the Oskil River, the 41st Brigade's artillerymen are tasked with blunting any attempted Russian breakthrough.
During only one day, the Ukrainian defense forces in the...
They have been kept busy. Here, a self-propelled howitzer of the 41st goes into action. And of course, the Russians fire back, though not usually something as big as this, which is powerful enough to take down an apartment building.
So this is the motor part of an S-300 anti-aircraft missile, which the Russians had adapted to be a surface-to-surface missile, which was launched and fell into the Kupiansk forest a few months ago, probably without exploding, but there are bits of it littered across the forest near the artillerymen. It's become a local landmark.
In sub-zero temperatures and under the constant threat of being spotted by enemy drones, much of the Ukrainian gunner's life is spent underground. This is the entrance to one of their dugouts. Outside it is -7 degrees and noisy with the sounds of war. Down here one finds another, more homely world. In wintertime, Ukrainian mice also tend to head indoors, where they can be a nuisance to soldiers sleeping rough. So it is that the artillerymen share their dugout with 2 pet cats of contrasting personalities.
Pixel.
Pixel was raised by hand by the gunners after they found her as an orphan kitten near their barracks. She is shy of strangers and scared of the noise of artillery fire. Kubi, seen here sharpening his claws on the dugout timbers, is an altogether more confident beast. He is the Schwarzenegger of mouse killing, the soldiers tell me proudly, a real Terminator. Few of these men are career soldiers. This is Sasha, call sign Hassan.
We're with an artillery unit who are fighting with Polish-donated self-propelled guns. And we have one of the members of the unit, which is Sasha, and he aims the shells, which have a range of something up to 15 kilometers. So in the forest above us, we can hear the constant boom and crash of artillery outgoing and some incoming. But in this dugout here, which is for 5 men, we have 3 layers of tree trunks above us, so it's as safe as it possibly could be in these circumstances. And going, Sasha, how long have you been fighting in an artillery unit in this war?
I managed to escape occupied Kherson via Crimea. Before that, I managed to get my mother out to Poland. I'm here since March 2023.
He was a shipyard welder before the invasion.
This war was started by professional soldiers, but it will be finished by farmers, welders and teachers.
He takes us to see his vehicle.
It is a Soviet-era self-propelled howitzer of a 1960s design and is hull down in a specially dug position. The gun is further concealed by camouflage netting, and a heavy mesh screen protects it against kamikaze drones. This is lifted only when the 122mm howitzer is about to fire. Ammunition has to be conserved.
We are not Russians who can fire indiscriminately. If we are given a target, we fire, for example, 6 shells. After that, we scatter away from the vehicle.
Sasha's crew has started the big diesel engine. The vehicle is not going anywhere, but the crew have to do this every so often to prevent it from freezing solid. Theirs is a deadly game of forest hide-and-seek. There is considerable nervousness here that our arrival and presence might be noticed by the Russians. Our film will be censored to make sure that nothing gives away the position. A major attack is expected any day now, but Sasha remains one of life's optimists.
When we meet again, I hope we'll be a little further east.
I wish him luck.
Everything will be fine.
It is not a sentiment widely offered by many on this frozen front line in these difficult times for Ukraine. Earlier this summer, male photographer Jamie Wiseman and I travelled to the Ukrainian front line. While there, we made 2 films that showed something of the visceral reality of 21st century trench warfare. In a matter of weeks, these films have been viewed some 3 million times on YouTube alone. But there was another film, the first of the trilogy, which we shot with the same Ukrainian army unit earlier in the year. A film we can now present on YouTube for the first time. The footage comes from the bitterly contested Bakhmut salient, where Ukraine was fighting to hold the Donbas city against repeated Russian assaults. The battle for Bakhmut was the bloodiest of the entire conflict so far. And, once again, trench works played their part. We all have our morning rituals, which might include a cup of tea and a tidy-up around the home before the day starts in earnest. Sergeant Oleg Lehezha is no different, only his routine is often subject to serious interruptions.
Да-да. Так, стоп. Смотри, у меня есть обезболивающий, Питер, но больше этот...
Like that Russian artillery near miss on his frontline trench in the besieged Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. 1 year ago, following the full-scale Russian invasion, the focus of the ground war was around the Ukrainian capital Kyiv. The Russian advance was stopped in the satellite suburbs, and eventually her forces withdrew. Now, aside from daily air raid alarms and occasional missile attacks, something like normal life and most of the population has returned to the capital city. Meanwhile, the focus of the ground war has moved 700 kilometers east to the industrial Donbas region, more specifically to the bloody Russian attempt to capture the small salt mining city of Bakhmut. Perched on a hilltop near Donetsk, Bakhmut has been besieged by the Russians since last summer. Much of it is destroyed. Less than 10,000 of its pre-war civilian population of 70,000 remain. The assaults intensified last autumn and have reached a new pitch this month. And with the end of winter has come rain and mud. Lots of mud. Roads have become rutted tracks, junctions, quagmires. The Bakhmut battlefield now resembles those of World War I. So do the tactics. Soldiers of the Wagner mercenary group, some of them convicts promised their freedom if they sign up to the fight, are being sent in human waves, attacks against Ukrainian trenches. As a consequence, Russia has suffered around 30,000 casualties in the attempt to take the town. But Ukrainian losses are also growing. One of them was Alexander Matsuyevsky. The filmed footage of his defiance and apparent execution after being captured by Russian forces near Bakhmut has caused outrage. But strategically, is Bakhmut really worth the cost? Or is it simply a propaganda prize? So male cameraman Jamie Wiseman and I set out the most contested and critical battlefield in Ukraine. Our guide was Sergeant Lahija, whose morning tea you saw interrupted, a 48-year-old father of 3. He's a member of a Ukrainian Special Forces unit. The day before we met him, he was discharged from a military hospital after being wounded for a second time in Bakhmut. An artillery near miss took off part of his right ear. In this video shot by a comrade in his frontline trench, you can see how, on another occasion, he was lucky to escape with his life. What you see is a large shell fragment from an airburst, hitting the part of the trench where he was standing only 30 seconds before.
Вот, возле нас прямо.
Это опять наш стреляет. Долбоёб, бля.
Sergeant Lahija took us on the journey to the Bakhmut sector. Eventually we reached Chazov Yar, a village in the municipality of Bakhmut. It must have been a pleasant location once, situated as it is next to a lake in a birch forest. Now it is the target for Russian artillery. And this is where 24 hours before we arrived, one of Ukraine's most decorated and famous soldiers was killed. Dmytro Kotsobailo, codenamed Da Vinci, was the youngest battalion commander in the Ukrainian armed forces. President Zelensky had presented him with the Order of the Golden Star, as well as the title Hero of Ukraine. Now he is dead, killed by a shell in Chazov Yar. It is being shelled today, and the Ukrainians are hitting back. The noise of outgoing artillery and rocket fire is deafening. But not every civilian has left. We are approached by pensioner Vasily Antolovich, who expresses his defiance and refusal to be cowed by the war around him. "You're not afraid of the shellings?" we ask him.
We've got used to them. Once I was crossing a bridge and the soldier shouted at me, old man, lie down." I said, "Why should I lie? I'm not afraid." Frankly speaking, I don't give a. Do you know what I mean? I'm from Donbas, guys. Do you know what Donbas is? Donbas will never bend a knee, and Ukraine will never bend a knee to anyone.
Hours before we arrive here, the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, says that Bakhmut could fall to the Russians within coming days.
Bakhmut may eventually fall in the coming days, and therefore...
To a background of artillery and rocket fire while sheltering from the torrential rain, I talked with Sergeant Lahija about his experiences in Bakhmut and the prospect of Ukraine holding the city. He has been told that after this battle, he may be sent to the UK for specialist training.
For the past 2 weeks, the front line was flexing 500 meters in one direction and 500 meters in the other. Some military guys believe that if the Russians make one single massive assault, they will probably break our defense. But they haven't done it yet. The Wagner mercenaries are low-life homeless people. They do not behave like military people. They are sent in waves. First batch of 30 people gets destroyed, and then the next. And this gets repeated maybe 10 times. It looks like Putin wants to get rid of these people rather than win the battle. Yes, there are a lot of talks about a retreat from Bakhmut. Our commanders know best, though. We can't say that Bakhmut must be abandoned. My personal belief is that we have to hold it. Bakhmut has become for our soldiers a symbol of resistance. It is in our souls. But any piece of our land is a symbol for us. From Bakhmut we can change the tide of war, but we need more armor and more equipment. It is quantity versus quality.
Of his latest wounding, he says,
"There was a location where we expected the Russians to break through. I was there with a group of engineers to mine it. Then a tank and mortars opened fire on us, wounding 2 people, including me. But we executed the task and returned to our positions. We stopped the Russians that day."
The time comes for us to leave. With only sidelights glowing, we drive faster and faster into the gathering night. To be seen here is to invite the Russian shells that killed Da Vinci. Behind us, Bakhmut holds. But for how long?